I'm Tim Ventura, and we're joined today by Colonel Dr. M.V. Coyote Smith, a professor of strategic studies at Air University's Graduate School for Mid-Grade Officers, Air Command, and Staff College. He retired from active duty in August 2016 while serving as a professor of strategic space studies at the School of Advanced Air and Space Studies. In past roles, he served as the director of the Center for Strategy and Technology, where he led Project Blue Horizons for the Air Force Chief of Staff, and at the Pentagon as the chief of DreamWorks, which was the Future Concepts Division of the National Security Space Office, where he led the Defense Science Board and directed the Space-Based Solar Power Study. Coyote's career of service includes roles in a variety of flight, space, and missile assignments, and as an instructor at the USAF Weapons School. He commanded the 321st Missile Squadron at F.E. Warren Air Force Base in Cheyenne, where his unit was recognized as the best ICBM squadron in the Air Force. During Operation Allied Force in Kosovo, he served as a strategist and targeting officer on Lieutenant General Michael Short's staff at the Air Component Headquarters at Dal Molen Air Base in Vicenza, Italy. During Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan, he served at U.S. CENTCOM headquarters as a strategist on General Tommy Frank's staff. He later served as the chief air and space power strategist on the Pentagon Strategic Planning Council during Iraqi freedom, providing advice to the Joint Staff and the Secretary of Defense. Dr. Smith has a BA in psychology from St. Michael's College and 3 master's degrees, one in poli-sci from the University of South Dakota, one in military arts and science, and another in air power strategy from various defense colleges. Most notably, he holds a PhD in strategic studies in politics and international relations from the University of Reading, in addition to numerous other aerospace systems, strategy, and leadership coursework from various institutions. So, Coyote, welcome, sir. It is a true, absolute pleasure and honor to have you with me today, sir.
Well, thank you very much. This is a mutual respect society here, because I wish I had your bio to read to your audience. It's really as impressive as mine.
Well, I just hope I did justice to it. That is book-length bio, and I left a lot out, too. So, again, you have an amazing background. I do not want to forget to thank you for your tremendous career of service over decades. And, you know, I should also say, for the longest period of time, it felt like I couldn't pick up an aerospace magazine or read about future aircraft without seeing quotes from you in the media. I mean, you were everywhere all of the time. So, you know, again, truly an honor to be able to interview you today.
Well, thank you very much for your support. Support like that's what it's all about. Thank you.
Well, given your past history of being a guiding light on the future of air power and technology, I want to start out by asking what trends and technologies you're most excited about right now.
Wow. I'm going to start out by saying something that's a little different. I want to give a shout out to the land component, to our soldiers and our Marines out there, and I want them to be confident that their Air Force has got their back. Close air support starts at home, and I want to tell you about the great things that the Army and the Marine Corps are doing to advance their services performance on the ground. I don't want to take up too much time. They certainly have their own spokesman that can do the job, but I want them to know that their Air Force has their back. Now, when you say what technologies interest me, the big thing that has me captured right now is quantum computing, quantum encryption and decryption, quantum communications, and quantum sensing, along with other types of priorities that our United States Air Force is focusing on, such as hypersonics, remotely piloted vehicles, or even artificially intelligent autonomous vehicles. And that's very important. The other thing that has me jazzed is the democratization of air power. And by democratization of air power, I mean I am serving at a school, at a college that teaches graduate level classes to 81 international officers from 64 different nations, in addition to around 400 American airmen, soldiers, sailors, and Marines. We put together these broadly international partnerships during peacetime, and they pay off tremendous dividends for us should we end up in a conflict somewhere in the world. We have ready-made partners allies and other types of people that we work with seamlessly because we've all gone to school together.
Well, so we're starting out with tech, but before we get too deep into that, I want to touch base on force transition, right? Because from what I understand, one of the biggest areas of change over the last few years has been a change in U.S. air power from a focus on desert warfare, right, in Iraq and Afghanistan, to a renewed focus on Europe and the South Pacific. Now, strategically, we are caught between Russia and China. We have tensions with both of those, and the latter of which is rapidly upgrading their armaments and outnumbers us in many domains, although from what I understand, China does not outnumber us in the air domain. So both of these adversaries are working to upgrade their weapons technologies. They are deploying new tech, and I'm wondering how our force transition is going and what some of the changes might be that involves.
Thanks, Tim. You know, the force transition is going to be a continuing evolution. We really have two militaries, one that is in the breach, if you will, ready to fight wars. Meanwhile, we have this huge logistics and sustainment train, which not only is keeping that fighting force ready for combat, but we are simultaneously studying what comes next. What have we learned from these previous engagements? What do we need to incorporate into our hardware, into our software? And by that I mean our strategies, our policies, our doctrine, our training and education. And lastly, our orgware. What do we need to do organizationally to get ourselves most ready for the types of conflicts that we're likely to face in the future? And along with this, I'll point out that we are becoming a much more joint and networked Department of Defense, not just inside the United States of America, but we are doing the same with our international partners so that we can work alongside with even weight of force without one partner being so overwhelmingly dominant. This democratization of air power is viewed as a future strength in our ability to engage anywhere around the world because we have regional cultural experts in our family of airmen. This is paying tremendous dividends, not just in places like the Middle East, but also in the Far East. Everybody's familiar with our good relationships with the Five Eyes, which include, of course, the United Kingdom and Canada, but Australia and New Zealand. And we are expanding our air power family of the most trusted agents that we deal with to include in Europe the French and the Germans, and in the Pacific, certainly the Japanese and the South Koreans. We also are warming our relationships with Vietnam and other actors in and around Southeast Asia as well. This is really quite remarkable because the science and technology that we are developing for the future is not just being done in the United States. We are beginning a lot of our high-tech programs in partnership with the allies and other partners so that we have a common footing. We find that it's beneficial for us with the spin-off technologies that our armed forces develop that can be transferred readily into the commercial market in order to give each of us as nations in this world an economic advantage that we can develop the type of profit that we use to feed our people and do other great things.
Well, so modern air power is supported by space power, and so I wanted to touch briefly on that. I hope this isn't too far outside of our domain, but satellite imaging tools like the GPS satellite network, a lot of these things are a very important part of today's military. And one of the things that I've been hearing is that gray zone warfare in the space domain might threaten our leadership on the ground, in the water, and in the air. So I guess, would you say that threats on orbit and technologies like anti-satellite weapons are having a potential effect on air power, or is that something that's fairly contained in its own domain?
Well, I wouldn't say that it's contained in its own domain because the systems that we have on orbit, and Tim, I might blow you and your listeners away. Right now, there are over 9,400 operational satellites on orbit. Yeah. That is more than there are aircraft in flight around the globe at any one time. We have more operational satellites on orbit doing a plethora of things. What space has become is our national infrastructure, and it's also become the international infrastructure upon which so many nations rely. We can think about Elon Musk's Starlink. And it forces us to think about things differently. When you build a communication system inside the United States, you just have a customer base that's trapped inside the United States. But when you go to space, you suddenly have all the world as potential customers. And so we do provide those types of services. Unfortunately, right now, our space systems are relatively undefended, and the threats against them are growing. This is of great and growing concern inside the Department of Defense for a number of reasons, obviously. In the last few decades, we have off-boarded personnel and oftentimes terrestrial sensors, meaning air, land, and sea sensors, and we've moved them to space, or we've moved the analysts back to stations here in the United States, and we use the remote sensors in the forward areas to route that information back to the States and then forward to the warfighters. But those links are traveling via satellite, and those satellite links require securing. And so the Space Force has put forward the idea of proliferating those constellations of satellites by increasing the number of satellites up there to complicate an adversary's targeting solution. This is what takes me to the quantum encryption and quantum decryption problem, along with quantum computing. We face a very real threat. And that has to do with the first nation that is able to decrypt, is able to succeed with quantum computing, will have the leg up to decrypt virtually any signal using current systems that we use to encrypt and secure transmissions. Quantum computing is a fascinating thing. It is a computer that can think at great speeds, but it can make assumptions, and it can weigh and measure each one of those assumptions as it goes along. And because it's able to do it so fast, it is able to break cryptography with alarming speed. If an adversary gets control of quantum decryption, and they will be able to break the massive records that they have recorded and kept of our transmissions and read our most classified messages. They also would have the opportunity of breaking the crypto on our currently existing satellites and changing the passwords. And then we could not get access to our satellites, and potentially they could get access to our satellites and use those systems against us. So we are in a rush to try to develop quantum computing so that we can arrive first at quantum encryption to secure our systems.
Okay. And from what I've read, actually, China was the first nation to do quantum encryption to a satellite. But from what I understand, it is still very rudimentary. It is still being developed and tested. So, the race is on, so to speak, right?
Absolutely right. And quantum is so confusing to the average person. There's probably only a dozen people in the world that can really explain it. And even they hit a point where they go, and we don't know why, but it works this way. It has to do with spooky coincidences between particles at a distance. It has to do with entangling particles way far away with particles that we're able to observe. And one of the threats that quantum technology provides us is he who masters the ability to do quantum sensing will be able to see not only everything, but through everything. Now, this is going to have a most magical medical spin-off because the medical community will be able to use this quantum sensing to analyze every aspect of the human body and detect those things that need to be fixed. If you are injured, they will have high fidelity knowledge of exactly what's going on. And they'll be able to monitor the fix and the cure while they are performing an operation or while they are going through the internal medicine of applying pharmaceuticals. So it's going to be a blessing in addition to a threat that's out there.
Okay. And the quantum sensing is something that I'm not familiar with, so I'm going to have to do some research on that. Is that similar to quantum radar? That's something that I've heard about, but I'm not that familiar with.
Quantum radar is absolutely a type of quantum sensing. Basically, think about it this way. Imagine having a single photon and broadcasting it and splitting it by a crystal. One part of that photon stays here, and that other photon travels out in a straight line as photons do to whatever it comes in contact with. And whatever it comes in contact with, because those two photons remain entangled, I will see the result in the photon that I have collected for whatever that photon is engaging out there. And there's no reflection. It is a, as they call it, a spooky coincidence between particles at a distance.
Amazing,
and there's no transmission
amazing.
that you can detect because there's no reflection, and it's amazing.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to have to do more study on that. I want to touch on drones because this is making headlines on a daily basis, and it seems like it is changing the nature of modern warfare. Drone warfare in Ukraine has really matured over the last year. Iran is reportedly building drone factories in Russia now. The Ukrainians are fielding these mass-produced flat-pack cardboard drones, and they are just throwing all sorts of different types and variations of drones at each other, both sides. So what are your thoughts on the conflict in general, and how are we seeing it drive the evolution of this technology, do you think?
Tim, you are so smart to ask this kind of question. I sat through a lecture this morning from one of our Air Force experts who had been in the Ukraine back in May and went back in October and said that what has happened with drone or remotely piloted vehicle technology has completely transformed that battle space in these short few months. At the beginning of 2023, Ukrainian and Russian forces had basically ended up in the trenches. They were at a standstill, and artillery was the dominant form of firepower on that battlefield. But then came these dirt-cheap drones by comparison to human life and other munitions. And now, if you can find it with a drone, you can shoot it with a drone. And they have families of drones operating as teams where you have the reconnaissance satellites. Listen to me. I'm thinking in old think. I've got to move along, Tim. I'm getting old. These new drones will fly along, find the target, and a striker will come in, a striking drone, and hit it. What has happened to Russian armor has been amazing because they have these drones that have ammunition on them, and they will strike the seam of a tank between the turret and the body of that tank, and it's just enough explosive force to knock that turret off center, and then it can't rotate. And so now you've got a tank that has a very limited utility with that pea shooter, if they can even point it because it's off kilter. The modern systems, we do believe, default to being unable to aim their gun because the system has been knocked ajar, kind of like a pinball game going tilt. And it's a total game changer over there because the drones that are doing this are literally just hundreds of dollars.
Yeah, well, so the one that just got me, this came out a couple of weeks ago, was the Kalashnikov group, right? The folks who make the AK-47.
Yeah.
They created a new Russian drone, and this one is reportedly capable of full autonomous operation. And from what I understand, this is a response to improvements and increases in jamming technology, right? So again, it's just, one thing on one side is driving the evolution on the other side. So as this jamming becomes more effective, autonomy appears to become more appealing. And I'm wondering how you may see that change the nature of this conflict as well.
I think this is going to be entirely evolutionary. I may not call it revolutionary because it fits inside where our current theories of warfare and our experience with warfare stand, if you will. If you think about a cruise missile, we can launch that from a couple thousand miles away, and it remains autonomous after it's fired to find its target using GPS sensors or onboard inertial navigation systems. So what we're really talking about is an evolution of the fire and forget phenomenon. Our AMRAAM weapons, we can drop those off our aircraft and they fly independently to the target once the target's been designated. And with the advent of artificial intelligence, with networking, and with autonomy, these types of platforms can be given their target. They know what they're looking for. They can remain networked until they assess with their multiple sensors that they're in a jamming environment or a spoofing environment, and then they can seal off and become fully autonomous. However, that full autonomy will probably have a back door that we will have the ability to spot beam to that weapon should anything go awry. And I don't need to say necessarily a weapon. Most of these are intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance type of platforms, which may be mated to a weapon. One thing that we're really happy about with regard to this type of technology is we can imbue these types of systems with a respect for the laws of armed conflict and for the rules of engagement, such that their machine abilities do not violate those types of restrictions that we choose to impose on ourselves. If you take a look at many of the engagements that the Russians have had with the Ukrainians, there have been war crimes. There have been atrocities committed.
Yeah.
Machines won't do that because they will have been commanded not to. Now, there is the concept out there of a self-learning machine that can learn bad things. That type of technology is still far, far away. What we're talking about is kind of the slave master concept of technology, where we can program this type of artificial intelligence to have very discrete limits in what it can access and what it can do. So we're happy that we may be coming to a time where somebody that has a machine that has better discrimination than a human being will be able to keep us on the right track, minimize collateral damage, minimize human suffering, and loss of property. This is one of the things I'm very proud about the Air Force. We have spent the last 3 or 4 decades dialing down the yield on our munitions and increasing our precision so that we strike what we intend to strike and nothing else. When we have a collateral damage incident, we inside the Air Force turn that into a massive investigation to make sure those mistakes are not repeated.
Well, so let me ask about the Replicator Initiative, because this is the DoD's thrust towards this. And my understanding is that this is our plan to essentially thwart the People's Republic of China asymmetric advantage in weapons capability, as well as the overwhelming numbers that they have in multiple domains. So I guess we're looking at the application of many small attributable weapons and combat platforms. And from what I understand, drones are a big part of that, but not necessarily the entire part of that. So what are your thoughts on this? And can you kind of describe how this is coming together in terms of what it will look like and where it's going?
Well, the problem that we faced in the past, Tim, is sometimes it'll take us a couple of years to build a super expensive aircraft or system that requires a super amount of money to sustain over the long period of time. And it might be the very best thing at doing what it does. It might be the top quality. But, we've discovered that quantity has a quality all its own. And the ability to mass produce material is critical when you get into a war kind of situation. I'll give you a great example that most everybody is familiar with. During the Second World War, the Germans produced the finest tanks. Their Panzer tanks, there was nothing comparable that the Allies had. The Sherman tank that the United States built was, totally inferior. Cannon from a German Panzer would cut right through the tank, and our tanks could barely knock the tread off, maybe knock the turret slightly. But we could produce 40 of them for every one that the Germans could produce. And a German tank commander said famously one time after the war, and I don't know what his ratios were, so I'm going to make this up, and so please understand that I'm paraphrasing. He may say that the Panzer tank was worth 10 American Sherman tanks. But every time a Panzer showed up on the battlefield, there were 11 Shermans to counter it. That was the numbers game that the Germans faced. And we were able to mass produce a very affordable Sherman tank with such numbers that the quantity overcame the quality. Now, when we deal with China, who has very good technology and has very good mass production capabilities, we are going to have to find something that is affordable for the American economy, that will not break the bank, that we are going to be able to mass produce, that will give us that same type of dynamic that we enjoyed in the Second World War against the Panzer.
Well, and I'm wondering if there might be kind of a middle road. And that takes me to my next section, which is General Gilmore Hostage III suggested that 5th generation jet fighters, and those are today's aircraft, may be able to operate together in what he described as a combat cloud, along with future unmanned combat aircraft. And this, to me, this sounded a little bit like the Loyal Wingman program, which I think a lot of people are already familiar with. But then as the Replicator Initiative progresses, I'd wondered if that might force the evolution of that idea as well, right? So we would have the expensive fighter jet, we would have the one that we invest all of those resources in developing that can outperform anything. But then we could add those small attributable weapon systems as well as unmanned drones alongside it and hopefully achieve the best of both worlds.
Boy, that's right. There is a lot of hope looking at this. There's a lot of studies and analysis. We have played war games after war games with this type of a concept where you'll send out one extremely high quality, mega expensive manned aircraft, which will fly along with a swarm, if you will, of very affordable aircraft. Probably the best analogy I can use that may light up people's imaginations is when we build an aircraft carrier, we build an aircraft carrier battle group around it, a number of other ships that provide for its defense, that provide for the electronic warfare environment, that provide missile defense and other types of assurances. This is the same concept that we're getting to with this remotely piloted or maybe even semi-autonomously piloted swarm of drones around some of our combat aircraft. This is exciting for a couple of reasons. Imagine a stealthy aircraft going in that has its own electronic warfare drones around it that raise the background noise so that adversary radars find it even harder to find that stealth aircraft. It carries its suppression of enemy air defense drones that go in and put down the surface-to-air missiles. Meanwhile, over the top, it has its air superiority fighters in the form of drones, clearing out those adversary counter-air threats. We will be able to conduct a strike with a pretty autonomous packaging of aircraft. We think that this gives us greater potential for the future, and we do see artificial intelligence and greater semi and maybe even autonomous type of platforms moving along with these air battle groups, if you will.
Well, and again, just taking this a step farther out, I was doing reading on 6th generation fighter concepts, right? These are craft that they don't even exist. It's just stuff that was being brainstormed. And a lot of the ideas included things like optionally manned aircraft, advanced digital capabilities like super high capacity networking, artificial intelligence, as you mentioned, data fusion, cyber warfare, as well as battlefield command control and communications capabilities. And so the electronics and the AI and just the intelligence built into these things looks like it's just out of sight. One of the things that I'd wondered, though, was given the physical demands of piloting high-performance aircraft, combined with these increasing digital capabilities, do you think that optionally manned aircraft will just gradually change into remotely piloted?
Yes, I do. I believe we will actually have a family of aircraft that will be piloted or maybe unpiloted. I think this is interesting because the statement was made in by one of our visiting commanders a couple of days ago that the drones that we will have accompanying our high-quality aircraft, they will do all of the things that the high-quality aircraft can't do. The manned aircraft is what I'm referring to. The manned aircraft has limits. Pilots can't pull, 15 Gs, but a remotely piloted system or an autonomous system can. And so where those high G maneuvers are required, we will have drones that will be doing that. Where we need to have decoys, where we need to have enemy, systems that are stimulating the enemy radars that the enemy can shoot at, and if we lose a few of them, we don't care about it. That's the type of opportunity that this provides. There are formidable counter-air threats in Russian and Chinese surface-to-air missile systems. Defeating those threats so that we regain an independence in the air so that we can conduct air operations, we call that air superiority, is going to be essential. Air superiority is job number one for the Air Force, and that is what allows us to provide that close air support to ground forces, which is one of our bread and butter missions. That's one of the missions that we are absolutely morally committed to. And when there's no need for close air support because our forces may not be in contact, then your Air Force will go after those more strategic targets interior to the adversary's country. But we've had the great luxury in recent years of being able to do parallel air operations, doing the long-range strategic attack, the interdiction, and the close air support at the same time. But we are keeping in mind that there will be times when we are going to have to fight our way into the interior of the country, just like armies and navies need to do. And we have learned a great deal from watching our close brethren in the land component over these last 20 years. Something that's been remarkable, Ben Lambeth wrote a book back in the 1990s titled The Transformation of American Air Power. I commend it to everyone's reading. He talked about how airmen through the decades have tried to improve our precision so we could actually strike the target we were aiming at. In the Second World War, we would have 1,000-plane bomber raids that would go out. We would lose 20% of that force and all those lives, and we'd miss the target by miles. Now, if you send out an F-15E with 9 weapons, you're going to hit 9 targets. And we don't need to have massive bombing raids. We do precision bombing raids. And we're not trying to kill people. We're trying to destroy the equipment and to disable them. We are always looking for the straw that breaks the camel's back. But the promise that your Air Force makes to the Army and the Marines, we're not going to forget that they are fighting a camel. And we will give them all the air power that we can turn on whenever they have a call for fire.
Well, that takes me to, actually, I had a question for the land component as well, and that's probably about America's favorite military aircraft, the venerable A-10 Thunderbolt II. I absolutely could not leave that one out. Yeah. It's not our fastest, it is not the prettiest, and it is not the most high-tech, but this has been a workhorse for decades, and from everything I have read or seen, everyone that I've talked to, this aircraft has been absolutely beloved by our armed forces. So Air Force Chief of Staff Charles Brown indicated that all of our A-10s are likely to be retired by 2028 or 2029, and various articles have described contingents of them actually being taken out of service right now. I think 40 of them just left this year. So that leads me to wonder, is there a replacement in the works for it? And I'm also wondering if this decision might be completely reversed given its anti-tank effectiveness and the growing threat of conflict with Russia.
You know, this is a really a long-standing debate. First of all, we love the A-10. The A-10 is one of the most venerable aircraft in our inventory in the history of the Air Force. What it has done for close air support has been nothing short of remarkable. But here's the problem in that modern battle space with things like the drones and the surface-to-air missiles and the shoulder-mounted weapons. The A-10 is coming to a point in time where it is not survivable in the combat zone. Its ability to perform its mission is being severely curtailed by the antiquity of its design, which was perfect for its niche. But like all of us, it gets older, and the sustainment cost, the last number I saw was it cost $7 billion a year to keep the A-10 in the inventory and up to speed. Good news is that we have the replacement for it, and it's called the F-35. And before anybody, kvetches on us, I want to point out that it's not the aircraft that is the important factor in close air support. It is the munition that comes off that aircraft. And we are designing families of close air support munitions ideally suited for the F-35 and other platforms, such as the F-15E, F-15, the XL version of the F-15E, so that we will be able to provide that close air support for a very long time. It's not lost on our airmen that somebody wrote above the parachute door, the parachute room's door at Bagram Air Force Base in Afghanistan some time ago, back during the war there, took a big fat El Marco and wrote above the door so every flyer could see it stepping out to their aircraft. And it said, "The mission is 19 years old and carries a rifle. Everything else is support." Everything. And in my opinion, that was a transformation of the American airman, to paraphrase Ben Lambeth's book title, because over these last 20 years, the airmen in the United States Air Force have watched with incredible admiration for the difficulty of the mission that our land forces have had in places like Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. And it forced us to recommit ourselves to that close air support. Fortunately, the Air Force has always had a long-standing commitment to close air support. Unfortunately, when you get into the Pentagon and the budget battles and things of that nature, there appears to be inter-service infighting. But I can tell you that the soldiers on the battlefield have been incredibly appreciative whenever that close air support shows up, and we are committed to continue to provide that.
Wonderful. Well, Coyote, I cannot think of a better note to close on than that. And again, let me thank you so much for your time, for your tremendous career of service, and just to acknowledge you have been a long-standing hero of mine for all of the spokesmanship that you've done on new technologies and changes in modern air power. So I want to close by asking, what is coming up for you in 2024, and what do you expect to see in terms of air power and technology over the next few months?
Oh, this is great. 2024 is going to be a watershed year for the Air Force, as is 2025. We have so many bits and pieces of technology that are going to be transformational, that will be coming out of the science and technology realm and stepping into research and development, and some of it's going to actually be hitting the street. I don't want to ruin or foreshadow some of that great stuff that will happen. But it's not just going to be transformative for the American military, but also for our international partners and for our commercial sector, where things like quantum sensing is going to improve so much of our medical treatments. There's so many things that hang out there. In terms of me, I'm living in paradise. I'm at Maxwell Air Force Base in beautiful Montgomery, Alabama, where I'm getting ready to go running in my jogging shorts and T-shirt because it's in the 70s. I have new classes that come in every year of bright young majors and lieutenant colonels from so many different countries. We learn from each other. We share concepts. We develop new plans. We war game out radical different ideas. And I'll tell you, most of the time, we end up laughing at ourselves because we tried something that we thought was ridiculous. But at least we're trying these things. Every now and then we discover a new strategy or a new tactic that hadn't been done before, and wow. We kind of save that in the palm of our hands for those times when we're going to need it. And, well, thank you very much for what you do, Tim, to help us get the word out.
Absolutely. Well, again, let me thank you one more time for being with us today, sir.
Thank you, Tim.